Female officer disappeared in 1985. 15 years later, a scrapyard worker discovered her uniform sealed in a crushed car trunk. Luis Delgado had been working at High Desert Salvage in Bakersfield, California, for nearly 12 years when he came across the car. It was early July, and the Central Valley heat made every inch of metal scalding to the touch, but Luis needed to process the old 1978 Cadillac Eldorado before the compactor crew arrived. The car had been sitting on lot row 4 for close to 3 months, part of a discounted insurance lot they'd picked up cheap from a flood zone outside of Modesto. The trunk didn't open easily. The lock had rusted solid, and Luis had to jam a crowbar into the seam to pry it loose. When it finally popped, he expected to see the usual haul: a worn-out spare tire, a set of jumper cables, maybe an old pair of sneakers. Instead, what he saw stopped him cold. Folded neatly inside the trunk was a police uniform, still crisp, still bearing its original form, despite 15 years sealed away. The name tag on the chest read, M. Lane. Luis stared at it in silence for a full minute before he whispered, "No way." He had lived in Bakersfield long enough to remember the story. Everyone did. Officer Melanie Lane had been 26 when she vanished in the fall of 1985, just 2 years into her service with the California Highway Patrol. The case had gripped the entire state. Lane's squad car was found abandoned off a desolate stretch of Route 58, engine running, driver's side door wide open. But her body, her badge, her weapon were never found. After 6 months, the search ended. Rumors circulated. Some said suicide, others whispered about a cartel retaliation. But nothing ever came of it. Luis immediately called his supervisor. "Ronnie, you need to get down here, right now." "What's going on?" Ronnie asked, his voice crackling over the lot's busted intercom system. "I found something in that Cadillac from Modesto. A police uniform. Says Lane on the tag." There was silence for a beat. Then, "Don't touch anything else. I'm calling the cops." 30 minutes later, Detective Aisha Kim from the Kern County Sheriff's Office arrived with 2 uniformed deputies. She was 45, Korean-American, and had served with the department for over 2 decades. Kim remembered the Lane case from her rookie years. She still remembered the missing persons flyer, the crisp photo of the young officer in uniform, her gaze steady and confident. "Mr. Delgado," Kim said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves, "walk me through everything." Luis led her to the Eldorado. "I was prepping it for the compactor. The trunk wouldn't open, so I used the crowbar. When I got it open, that uniform was sitting right there folded just like that." Kim leaned over the trunk. The name tag was intact. So was the badge number. 5119, officially assigned to Officer Melanie Lane in 1985. The fabric was in pristine condition, no tears, no signs of blood. In fact, it had clearly been cleaned and pressed before being stored. "Where'd this car come from?" she asked. Ronnie pulled out the clipboard from the yard office. "Insurance salvage, picked up at auction in April, came from a flood damage lot in Modesto, but we didn't see any water damage." Kim snapped photos from multiple angles before carefully removing the uniform and placing it into an evidence bag. "I need everything on this vehicle," she said. "Registration history, title transfers, re-reports, insurance documents. I want a full paper trail." "There's something else," Luis added, hesitating. "You're going to want to see this." He pointed toward the base of the trunk. The liner looked normal at first glance, but when Kim inspected it closely, she saw that it had been sliced with precision and reattached using tiny screws. She unscrewed the panel carefully. Underneath, she found a hidden compartment just large enough to store files, photos, or a weapon. It was empty now, but a distinct dust pattern suggested that something had been there, undisturbed for years. "We need to process the entire car," Kim said to the deputies. "Seal the lot. Call in forensics. This is now a crime scene." That evening, the story broke on the local news. By 6 p.m., it had aired on every major channel in Kern County. Watching the broadcast from his apartment in Fresno was Thomas Lane, Melanie's younger brother. He was 38 now, a high school physics teacher with graying temples and a photo of his sister on the mantel. Melanie had vanished when he was just 23, and he had never believed she'd simply walked away. The official story always felt wrong. Investigators at the time had floated theory stress, a breakdown, even suicide. But Thomas knew his sister. She was sharp, methodical, and fiercely driven. He believed someone had silenced her. He called Detective Kim immediately. "Detective, my name's Thomas Lane. I'm Melanie's brother. I saw the story on Channel 8. Please tell me what you found." Kim's voice was calm but firm. "Mr. Lane, I understand how difficult this is. We're reopening the investigation. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow, in person." "I've waited 15 years for this call," he replied. "I always knew someone killed her." The next morning, Thomas met Kim at the sheriff's office. She had pulled the original Case Files 3 archive boxes filled with notes, photos, and interview transcripts. The original lead detective had been Michael Ridley, now long since retired. "Mr. Lane," Kim began, "I've reviewed the old reports. Can you tell me what you think happened to your sister?" Thomas pulled out a thin manila folder. "She was working on something before she vanished, asking questions about narcotics movement through tribal land east of Tehachapi. She mentioned a name to me once, Julian Mercer." Kim looked up. "Who is Julian Mercer?" "In 1985, he was a federal prosecutor, specialized in organized crime. Melanie told me she had evidence of corruption in his office. She wouldn't say much, just that she needed to be sure before going public." "Did she report this to her commanding officer?" "She said she would, but not yet. She wanted proof. Melanie didn't take accusations lightly." Kim frowned. None of this had been in the original reports. "Detective Ridley never asked me about any of this," Thomas said quietly. "He kept focusing on her personal life, kept asking if she was seeing someone, if she had money problems. When I brought up Mercer, he told me I was grasping at straws." Kim opened one of the boxes and pulled out the old scene photos. The cruiser had been found with the engine running. The driver's side door was open. Her radio was on. Her sidearm was missing. But there were no signs of struggle. The official theory had always been that she'd simply walked away. Kim didn't believe that anymore. Walked away from her cruiser and died of exposure in the desert. "Mr. Lane," Detective Aisha Kim said, her voice quiet. "There's something else." She paused, flipping through a file in her hand. "The vehicle where we recovered the uniform, the 1978 Catalacid, wasn't originally from Bakersfield. The VIN traces back to a rental agency in Fresno. The records say it was rented in late 1985. Thomas Lane sat forward. "You're telling me someone kept her uniform for 15 years?" "It appears so," Kim said. "And not just kept. It was professionally cleaned, carefully folded and preserved. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone went to lengths to protect and store what could be evidence." Thomas reached into his folder again and handed her an old, faded newspaper clipping. "Detective, there's something else you need to see. Julian Mercer, the man my sister told me about, was appointed to the federal bench in April 1986, just 6 months after Melanie disappeared. He's still serving." Kim studied the article. Julian Mercer, 42 at the time, had made his name as an aggressive federal prosecutor with a reputation for relentless sentences. His confirmation as a judge had been controversial, but it passed thanks to deep political connections. "Mr. Lane," Kim said carefully, "did your sister ever keep personal notes or records about the cases she was investigating?" "She did." Thomas nodded. "She mentioned keeping important materials in a safety deposit box at Valley First Bank. But after she vanished, I couldn't access it. I wasn't listed. The bank told me the box was closed in 1986. Do you know who closed it?" "They wouldn't say. Confidentiality policy." Kim scribbled notes. "We're going to trace that box. If Melanie had anything concrete about corruption, that's where she'd have kept it." The forensics team had just finished processing the Cadillac. The report came in the next morning. Several partial fingerprints had been found on the screws used to modify the trunk liner, but none matched anyone in the national database. Kim looked into the vehicle's rental origin. The VIN led her to a now-defunct company called Suncrest Rentals, which had gone out of business in 1987. but the address used in its articles of incorporation triggered something in her memory. She cross-referenced it. Detective, Officer James Rodriguez said later that afternoon, I dug deeper into Suncrest Rentals. The parent company behind it was something called Sierra Holdings, LLC. And? Kim asked, already suspecting what was coming. Sierra Holdings was dissolved in 1988, but the original corporate filing lists Julian Mercer as the registered agent. The pieces began to snap into place. Get me everything you can find on Sierra Holdings, Kim ordered, and we need to talk to Detective Ridley. On to. Michael Ridley, the original lead investigator on the Lane case, had retired and was living in a quiet neighborhood in Visalia. Now 72, his voice was gruff over the phone, but he agreed to meet. When Kim arrived at his modest home, he seemed distant, unwilling to talk about the case. Detective Ridley, Kim said, pulling out her notepad. I'm reopening the Melanie Lane investigation. I need to understand why you centered on the suicide or accident theory. Ridley folded his arms. Look, I worked that case for half a year. No signs of foul play. She was under stress. Her performance was suffering. People snap sometimes. What performance issues? Kim asked. She was having conflicts with her training officer. There were rumors she might be transferred, possibly even terminated. Kim frowned. That's not in the case file. Ridley shrugged. Not everything makes it into the report. The Highway Patrol didn't want bad press. Captain Fields told me to keep things quiet. End of. Kim had already checked on Captain Fields. He had died in 1992. There would be no way to verify Ridley's claims. Detective Ridley, Kim said firmly, did you ever investigate the possibility that Officer Lane was targeted because of an investigation she was pursuing? Targeted? What are you talking about? Her brother says she had evidence of corruption possibly involving Julian Mercer. Ridley's eyes narrowed. Thomas Lane was grieving. He made a lot of noise back then. Accused everyone. You can't chase every theory. But did you check it out? I made calls. Nothing came up. Who did you call? I don't remember. It was 15 years ago. Kim leaned forward. This is a murder investigation now. Did anyone pressure you to close the case? Ridley stood. Detective, I worked clean for 30 years. I didn't cover up anything. The case was closed because there was no crime to investigate. 7. After he left the room, Kim sat quietly, staring at the dusty case files. Witnesses had been skipped. Potential leads ignored. The entire inquiry had been treated like a procedural inconvenience. Her phone rang. It was Luis Delgado from the salvage yard. Detective, we found something else. We were pulling the last of the interior out of the Cadillac. There was something wedged beneath the rear seat. What is it? A cassette tape, labeled JM Meeting 10.20.85. Kim felt a jolt go through her chest. The 20th of October, 1985, 5 days before Officer Lane disappeared. She drove straight to High Desert Salvage. Luis met her near the car. He wore gloves and held a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it was a microcassette. The label was handwritten, neat and deliberate. JM Meeting 10.20.85. Where did you find it? It was lodged way deep, right under the seat cushion, Luis said. I was vacuuming and felt something stiff. Had to use pliers. And Kim turned the cassette over. It looked untouched by moisture or heat, preserved like the uniform. This needs to go to the lab immediately, she said. This could change everything. And for the first time in 15 years, the case of Officer Melanie Lane was no longer silent. Kim continued digging into the background of Julian Mercer. In 1985, he had been serving as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of California, specializing in organized crime. His caseload included several high-profile prosecutions targeting drug trafficking organizations operating along the border with Mexico. One case in particular stood out: the prosecution of the Del Rio cartel, a group that had made significant inroads into the San Joaquin Valley. The Del Rio case had collapsed spectacularly in the fall of 1985. Key witnesses had recanted, crucial evidence had disappeared, and the media had swarmed the courtroom. Mercer had blamed the breakdown on sloppy police work, but the scandal left a permanent mark. The story had briefly made national headlines before being buried by other crises. That afternoon, Thomas Lane called Kim. "Detective, something just came back to me," he said. "About a week before Melanie disappeared, she mentioned that name again, Julian Mercer. She said she was meeting with someone about him." "Did she say who?" "No," Thomas replied, "but she sounded excited. Said she finally had proof of what she suspected." Kim paused. "Thomas, think carefully. Did Melanie ever talk about recording anything? Audio or tapes?" "Actually, yes," he said. "She bought one of those small handheld tape recorders, said it was for taking notes during interviews." Kim arranged to meet Thomas the next morning at Melanie's old apartment. The building was still standing, though the paint had faded and the balconies sagged under the heat. The current property manager let them into Unit 2B, which had once been hers. "She lived here until she went missing," Thomas said. "After she was declared dead, the state police came and cleared everything out. Took her files, her equipment. I only got to keep a few personal items." "What kind of files?" Kim asked. "They told me it was official case material. Said it couldn't be released to family. I never even got to look." And P. Kim made a note to follow up with the Highway Patrol's evidence archives. "Do you remember if she ever mentioned anyone in the prosecutor's office by name?" "She did once," Thomas said after a moment. "Angela Torres. She said Angela was a paralegal who worked on drug cases." Kim tracked Torres down the next day. Now 52 years old, she was still working for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento, holding a senior position with 3 decades of experience. When Kim called and explained the nature of her investigation, Torres hesitated but agreed to meet in the condition of confidentiality. They met at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. "Miss Torres, I'm investigating the 1,985 disappearance of Officer Melanie Lane," Kim said. "I understand you may have known her." Torres looked visibly nervous. "That was a long time ago. I'm not sure I remember much." "And did Officer Lane ever express concerns about corruption, particularly related to the Del Rio case?" "I've worked in this office for 30 years," Torres replied cautiously. "I've never been part of anything like that." "I'm not accusing you," Kim reassured her. "But did Melanie ever speak to you about specific prosecutors or cases she was investigating?" Torres glanced around. "She asked questions about the Del Rio case. She thought something was wrong about how it was handled. She was especially focused on evidence chain of custody, the way witnesses were being managed." "Did she say what she believed had happened?" "She told me someone on the inside was feeding information to the cartel. She didn't say who, but she was scared." Kim leaned in. "Did she ever mention Julian Mercer?" Torres hesitated. "I can't. I don't know if I should." "Miss Torres," Kim said, "this is a murder investigation. Melanie Lane was found just days ago. Her uniform had been hidden for 15 years. Anything you remember could help us catch the person responsible." Torres nodded slowly. "She believed Mercer was taking payments from the Del Rio group. She said she had evidence, a recording." "What kind of recording?" "She didn't tell me. Just that it would expose everything. She was going to go public with it." At that moment, Kim's phone buzzed. The forensic lab had finished analyzing the cassette tape recovered from the Cadillac. She returned to the station and entered the evidence room. Inside, behind the secured desk, a small player had been set up. She put on headphones and pressed play. The tape began with the soft scratch of analog hiss, then voices. Male voice 1, "The Del Rio case needs to disappear." Male voice 2, "The evidence is solid. I can't just dismiss federal charges." Male voice 1, "You've done it before. Witnesses change. Evidence goes missing. You know how this works." And male voice 2, "It's risky." Male voice 1, "You've been careful. Keep being careful. The payment will be in the usual place." Male voice 2, "How much?" Male voice 1, "50,000. Same as last time." Kim froze. The first voice she knew it. It was Julian Mercer. She'd heard him speak at a conference in Monterey 5 years ago. The accent, the cadence was unmistakable. The second voice was unfamiliar, possibly Hispanic, with a slight northern Mexico inflection. The conversation went on for 12 minutes. It was a blueprint for deliberate sabotage: who to discredit, how to stall indictments, and which pieces of evidence to make vanish. It was damning. Kim called the FBI immediately. Agent Sarah Marshall arrived within 2 hours. A veteran of public integrity cases, she listened to the tape with a blank face. "If this is legitimate," Marshall said finally, "we're dealing with a compromised federal judge who's likely been on the take for 15 years. The recording is dated the 15th of July, 1985, Kim said. "Officer Lane vanished on the 18th of July. I believe she was murdered for what she knew." Marshall nodded, flipping through the case file. "We'll need to verify the recording's authenticity. We'll also investigate whether Judge Mercer still has ties to organized crime." And the original case?" Kim asked. "It was a mess. Leads ignored. Focused on accident or suicide from the beginning." "We'll reopen that too," Marshall said. "Who was the lead detective?" "Michael Ridley. Retired now. I spoke with him last week. He was evasive." Marshall took out a notepad. "We'll need to speak with him again, this time under oath." Marshall made a note. "We'll need to formally interview Ridley and anyone else involved in the original investigation." Kim's phone rang. It was Luis Delgado from the salvage yard again. "Detective, I'm sorry to keep calling, but we found something else in the Cadillac. It was hidden in the spare tire compartment." Kim's pulse quickened. "What is it now?" "Documents. Looks like financial records and photographs." Kim and Agent Marshall drove straight to High Desert Salvage. Luis had laid everything out on a folding table inside the garage office. There were 3 manila envelopes, each stuffed with paperwork and photo prints. Inside the first were bank statements, some dating back to 1984. Others were deposit slips. The second envelope contained surveillance, photos black and white, grainy but clear enough. Kim lifted one and froze. "This account belongs to Julian Mercer," she said, pointing at a highlighted section of a bank statement. "And look at the deposit amounts. $25,000, $50,000, always made within days of major drug cases, being dismissed or reduced to minor charges." Marshall picked up one of the photographs. "And this. That's Mercer. Meeting with Carlos Del Rio brother of the cartel leader. The images showed them together in multiple locations: restaurant parking lots, hotel lobbies, and even outside a courthouse in Fresno. Each one had a date stamped in the corner. They spanned over a year, and several were taken after the Del Rio case had been dropped." "This is a complete intelligence file," Marshall said. "Officer Lane wasn't just looking into rumors. She was building a federal case." Kim nodded grimly. "And she never got to finish it." She scanned the documents again. "Look at the handwriting on these notes. The numbers, the annotation sites, all consistent. Thomas mentioned her distinctive 7s and 9s. Just then Thomas Lane walked in. Kim called him over. "David," she said, still using the alias from their earlier fabricated name replacement, "take a look at this handwriting. Do you recognize it?" He stared down at the documents. His face paled. "That's hers," he said softly. "That's Melanie's handwriting. She documented everything, even the way she wrote her forceps, all here." Marshall leaned over. "If Officer Lane prepared these files herself, she was conducting a highly sophisticated investigation. The kind of detail here? She had help." "Oh?" "What kind of help?" Kim asked. "Someone with access to federal resources," Marshall said. "Surveillance capability, internal banking data, secure records. She wasn't acting alone." Kim stared at the paperwork, heart sinking. If Melanie had federal support, why wasn't there any record of it in her personnel file? "It might have been off the books," Marshall replied, "or classified. But if it was known to others, someone decided to shut it down permanently." And the evidence painted a clear picture. Julian Mercer had been accepting bribes from the Del Rio cartel for years. Officer Melanie Lane had uncovered the operation and compiled damning proof. 3 days after her final meeting, she vanished. "Agent Marshall," Kim asked, "what's our next move?" We approach Mercer cautiously. He's been a sitting federal judge for 15 years. He has allies in the Justice Department, connections in every courthouse. If we move too fast, this evidence could disappear. "And the original investigation?" Kim pressed. "Someone deliberately buried this." "We'll investigate that separately," Marshall said. "But for now, we build the case, brick by brick." Kim turned to Thomas. "Your sister was a hero. She died trying to expose corruption that went all the way to the federal bench." "I always knew she didn't just give up," he said, voice trembling. "Melanie was too driven, too smart. I told them she was silenced. No one believed me." "We believe you now," Kim said. The case had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What began as a cold case on a missing officer had turned into a federal corruption probe involving organized crime, judicial misconduct, and murder. Marshall wasted no time assembling a task force. The FBI brought in agents from their public corruption unit. The DEA added narcotics investigators. Forensic accountants were tasked with analyzing the financial trail. Kim remained in charge of the homicide investigation, coordinating between agencies and following leads tied to Melanie Lane's disappearance. The first objective: verify the authenticity of everything Melanie had collected. The cassette tape was sent to Quantico's audio analysis unit. The photos were examined by digital forensics experts to confirm there had been no tampering. Every slip of paper was scanned and logged. Every date cross-referenced with court records and case dismissals. While the federal team moved forward, Kim turned back to the roots of the case. She began reaching out to officers who had served with Melanie in 1985. Many had retired. Some had changed departments. A few were deceased. Sergeant Rita Gonzalez, Melanie's former training officer, was now working as a private investigator in Phoenix. When Kim contacted her, Gonzalez agreed to meet immediately. "I've been waiting years for this," she said. "I never believed Melanie killed herself. That whole investigation was a cover." "What do you think happened?" Kim asked. "Someone killed her. She was professional, focused. She wouldn't have just left her cruiser running on the side of the road. That wasn't Melanie." Kim showed her the evidence collected so far. "Did you know she was investigating corruption?" "She never said it outright," Gonzalez replied. "But I could tell something was going on. She was asking about protocol, how evidence was handled, how files were stored. She started working late, taking meetings, off duty." "Did you report any of this?" "I tried. I went to Captain Fields. He told me to mind my own business, said the investigation was being handled." "What was your impression of him?" Gonzalez frowned. "He seemed uneasy. More than he should have been. Usually when an officer goes missing, everything gets mobilized. Media, overtime, statewide alerts. But with Melanie, it was like they wanted it buried." Kim took notes carefully. "Did you ever interact with Detective Ridley?" "A few times," Gonzalez said. "He asked a lot of questions about Melanie's mental state, wanted to know if she was depressed, if she had problems at home, but he never once asked about what she was working on. He didn't seem interested in the possibility that Melanie had been murdered." "Did anyone else ever ask you about her investigation activities?" Kim asked Sergeant Gonzalez. "Actually, yes," Gonzalez replied. "About a week after she disappeared, a man showed up at the station, said he was from the U.S. Attorney's Office, wanted to know if Melanie had been working on any federal cases." "Do you remember his name?" "He said it was Williams. Never saw him before, never saw him again." Kim checked with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento. No one named Williams had worked there in 1985. The visit hadn't been recorded. It was off the books. Possibly someone trying to find out what Melanie knew and if she'd told anyone else. Then the forensic report on the cassette came in. The recording was authentic, made on the 15th of July, 1985. Voice analysis confirmed that one of the speakers was indeed Julian Mercer. Agent Marshall called an emergency task force meeting. "We have enough to approach Judge Mercer," she said, "but we need to be careful." "What do you recommend?" Kim asked. "We find out if he's still involved in organized crime. If he is, we catch him in the act." "How do we do that?" "Surveillance," Marshall said. "We monitor his movements, his communications, and especially his financial activity. If he's still taking bribes, we'll get him." The surveillance began immediately. Mercer lived in a gated home in the hills of Shafter, drove a black Mercedes S-Class, and belonged to an exclusive country club. On the surface, his lifestyle matched his judicial salary. But the deeper they dug, the more cracks appeared. He had multiple accounts in different banks. Some were under his name, others under shell corporations. Unusually large cash deposits showed up at regular intervals, often coinciding with judicial rulings that benefited known cartel-linked defendants. The pattern suggested ongoing criminal activity. Meanwhile, Kim continued her investigation into the original 1985 case. She discovered that Detective Michael Ridley, the original lead investigator, had retired immediately after closing Melanie's case. His pension had been enhanced with a special commendation odd for what was officially ruled an accidental disappearance. "Agent Marshall," Kim said during a late briefing, "I think Ridley was paid to bury the investigation." End of sick. What do you have to support that? He retired early with full benefits. His last case was Melanie's. He was defensive when I spoke with him. Something's off. We'll need to pull his financials from 1985. If there was a payoff, it might still show up. Then Thomas Lane called again. "Detective, I found something at my mother's house," he said. "An envelope Melanie gave her just before she disappeared. Told her to keep it safe." "What's in it?" "Documents. About Mercer. Financial records, schedules, contact names. She was planning to give it all to the FBI." Kim met Thomas at his mother's home on a quiet cul-de-sac in northeast Bakersfield. Mrs. Lane, now 78, still lived in the modest house where Melanie had grown up. The envelope had been hidden in a bedroom closet, sealed and marked with Melanie's handwriting. "Mrs. Lane," Kim asked gently, "did Melanie tell you why she gave you this?" "She said she was working on something dangerous," the elderly woman whispered. "She said if anything happened to her, the truth had to come out. She told me some people would kill to keep it secret." The contents were explosive. Melanie had tracked Mercer's movements, documented his financial connections, and listed names of others in the network, at least 6 judges, a dozen prosecutors, several law enforcement officers, all allegedly tied to the same corruption ring receiving payments from organized crime. "Agent Marshall," Kim said later that night, "this is bigger than we thought. Melanie uncovered a network. She wasn't just focused on Mercer." Marshall read the notes in silence. She was going to bring it all to the FBI. She planned to hand it over on the 19th of July. She disappeared on the 18th of July. The surveillance on Mercer was producing results. He was still meeting with known criminals, still receiving envelopes, still altering case outcomes. "The corruption didn't stop," Marshall said. "It's been active for 15 years. "We need to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office," Kim said. "Start preparing charges." "But we need to be very careful about who we trust," Marshall warned. "How do we know the current prosecutors aren't involved?" "We don't," Kim said. "Bring in people from outside California." That night, Kim's phone rang again. It was Luis Delgado from the salvage yard. "Detective, I hate to keep calling," he said, "but someone broke in last night." "Broke in?" "They didn't take anything valuable, but they went through the Cadillac." Kim and Marshall arrived at the yard 10 minutes later. The gate lock had been cut cleanly. Whoever had done it was experienced. The car had been torn apart, panels removed, seats cut open, the engine bay pried apart. "They searched every inch," Kim said. "They even looked inside the tires," Luis added. "This wasn't some junkie. They knew exactly what they were doing." "Someone thinks there's still more evidence in this car," Marshall said. "Which means someone knows what we found," Kim replied. "But how?" Marshall asked. "This investigation has been airtight." Kim stared out at the dark yard, the scattered vehicles lit only by floodlights and dust. "There's a leak somewhere," she said, "and we'd better find it before they come looking for more than a car." "Luis, do you have security cameras on site?" Kim asked. "Yes, but they're old," he admitted. "The quality's not great." The grainy security footage showed a shadowy figure in dark clothing moving with intent across the salvage yard around 2 a.m. The person never looked toward the cameras and stayed in blind spots as much as possible. Still, their movements were precise. "They've been here before," Kim said, watching the footage. "They knew exactly where the Cadillac was, and they knew it had already been processed for evidence." Then another thought struck her. "Agent Marshall," Kim said slowly, "what if someone in law enforcement is helping cover this up?" "You mean someone still active?" Marshall asked. "Yes. Someone who has access to everything we're doing, someone who knows what we found." Marshall nodded grimly and reviewed the current list of personnel with access to the investigation. It wasn't long. "We restrict access immediately. No one outside this task force sees anything else from this case." "What about Detective Ridley?" Kim asked. "If he was involved back then, what if he still is?" "We'll put him under surveillance," Marshall replied. "If he's still working with Mercer, we'll catch them both." The investigation had become more dangerous by the hour. Melanie Lane had uncovered a network that had operated for decades. People had already killed to keep it quiet once, and they were clearly willing to do it again. The break-in at the salvage yard wasn't random, it was a warning. Someone was watching. Surveillance on Ridley yielded results almost immediately. Within 24 hours of the break-in, he was spotted meeting with Julian Mercer. The meeting took place on a golf course in northeast Fresno. From a distance, long-range cameras captured them greeting each other with familiarity. The two men walked the course together, heads bent in close conversation. "They're definitely still in contact," Marshall said, studying the photos. "This isn't a one-time thing." Kim zoomed in on one of the images. "Look at their posture, their body language. They've done this before. This is an established relationship." "We need audio," Kim added. "I'm submitting the request for electronic surveillance." The federal wiretap authorization came through less than 12 hours later. Listening devices were placed in Ridley's home and Mercer's chambers. What they recorded confirmed every suspicion. "The Lane case is heating up again," Ridley said in a phone call. "What do they know?" Mercer asked. "They found the evidence in the car, documents, tapes, photos, enough to take both of us down." "Is it federal?" "Yes. They've got FBI agents involved now." "They can't trace it to us directly." "They can, they will, unless we shut it down." Kim and Marshall listened to the conversation in stunned silence. The conspiracy was alive, active, desperate. "They're planning something," Marshall said quietly. "We need to move faster." "What about the others Melanie identified?" Kim asked. "Are they still involved?" "We're investigating, but Ridley and Mercer are the immediate threat." And Thomas Lane continued to help in every way he could. One afternoon he called Kim again. "Detective, I just found one of Melanie's personal journals in a box at my place. I think you need to see it." Kim met Thomas at his apartment that evening. The small leather-bound book was worn but intact. Inside, Melanie's handwriting documented a timeline of fear and surveillance in the days before she vanished. The 10th of July, 1985. The blue sedan was parked across the street again. Same license plate. Whoever it is, they're watching. The 12th of July, 1985. I'm being followed to work. They want me to know they're watching. It's intimidation. The 14th of July, 1985. I'm going to record the meeting tomorrow. If anything happens to me, at least there'll be evidence. The 16th of July, 1985. Someone searched my locker. They know I have the recording. I need to get the evidence to the FBI tomorrow. Kim turned to Thomas. "Did Melanie ever say who she thought was following her?" "She mentioned Ridley once," he said. "Said she saw him outside her apartment. She thought it was strange he worked a different district." "When?" "About a week before she disappeared. She wrote it down, too." Kim flipped through the journal. There it was. The 11th of July, 1985. Detective Ridley was parked outside my building when I got home. He left as soon as I saw him. Why would he be in my neighborhood?" The entry chilled Kim. Ridley had been involved since the beginning, and he was still trying to silence the case. The next morning, Marshall called an emergency task force meeting. "We have enough to move on both of them," she said. "But timing is crucial." "What are our options?" Kim asked. "If we arrest Ridley first, he could tip off Mercer. If we arrest Mercer first, he might destroy more evidence." "Simultaneous arrests?" Kim suggested. "That's the plan." Marshall nodded. "We coordinate with the U.S. Marshals to arrest Mercer in his chambers. You lead the team that takes Ridley at his home." Quote, Kim nodded. "What charges are we filing?" "Conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, corruption, and more coming once we process the financial trail." The web Melanie had uncovered 15 years ago was unraveling at last, but Kim knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because if these men had gone to such lengths to silence one officer, how far would they go now? Julian Mercer would be handled directly by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The arrests were scheduled for early the next morning. Detective Aisha Kim spent the evening combing through the evidence again and preparing for her interrogation of former Detective Michael Ridley. She knew he'd try to downplay his role, maybe even deflect blame. But this time, she had the truth and the Tepesto back her up. At exactly 6 a.m., Kim and 4 detectives from the Bakersfield Police Department arrived at Ridley's modest house on the outskirts of town. He answered the door in a robe, clearly startled by the early knock. "Detective Michael Ridley," Kim said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Officer Melanie Lane." His face turned gray. "This is ridiculous. I investigated that case properly." "You have the right to remain silent," another officer said. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." As Ridley was handcuffed, Kim allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. After 15 years, one of the men responsible for Melanie's death was finally in custody. At the same time, U.S. Marshals entered Judge Mercer's chambers at the federal courthouse and placed him under arrest. The moment the news broke, the media erupted. A sitting federal judge arrested for conspiracy and murder was unprecedented. The interrogation of Ridley began within the hour. Kim and Agent Marshall conducted the interview, while Assistant U.S. Brothers within uslaf.ob. Attorney Rachel Martinez observed from the corner of the room. "Detective Ridley," Kim began, "we have evidence you accepted money to cover up the murder of Officer Melanie Lane. This is your opportunity to cooperate." Ridley's attorney, who had arrived quickly, advised him to remain silent. But Ridley couldn't sit still. He was sweating, tapping his fingers nervously. "I want to make a deal," he blurted, ignoring his lawyer's warning. "What kind of deal?" Marshall asked. "I'll tell you everything I know about Melanie's death and Mercer's operation, but I want immunity." "We're not offering immunity," Martinez replied. "But we can talk about reducing charges if your cooperation is genuine. Start with Melanie Lane. What happened to her?" Ridley looked to his lawyer, then met Kim's eyes. "She was killed on the 18th of July, 1985, but I didn't kill her." "Who did?" "Carlos Del Rio. He was Mercer's guy. He handled problems." "How do you know this?" Kim demanded. "Because Mercer told me. He said she got too close, and Del Rio made it go away." Kim clenched her jaw. "You knew she was murdered, and you helped cover it up." "I was paid to bury the investigation. I didn't know they were going to kill her until afterward." "How much?" Marshall asked. $50,000. Deposited into an account under my wife's name." The confession was explosive. Ridley admitted to accepting bribes, falsifying case files, and protecting Mercer for over a decade. "Who else is involved?" Kim asked. "There's a long list. Judges, prosecutors, cops, even a few elected officials. Mercer wasn't the whole machine, just the face." "We need names." Ridley provided a list. It matched the one Melanie had written in her final notes. The corruption had reached every corner of the justice system. "What about the break-in at the salvage yard?" Kim asked. "Was that you?" "Mercer told me to check if anything was left in the car. I hired someone to search it." End. Did they find anything? Number? You'd already recovered everything. The interrogation went on for 6 hours. Ridley detailed the structure of the network, how payments were handled, which cases had been tampered with, and how information flowed through courtrooms and precincts. He named names, gave dates, explained how the machine had operated in silence for years. When it was over, Kim felt both exhausted and vindicated. "Agent Marshall," she asked, "how many people are we looking at?" "Based on his testimony and Melanie's evidence, we're drafting at least 20 indictments. This is going to be the largest public corruption case in California history." And it started with a mechanic finding a uniform in a car trunk. Outside the station, Thomas Lane was waiting. "Detective? Did he confess?" Kim nodded. "Ridley confessed to covering up Melanie's murder. We know who ordered it. We know why. Penned. Who was it?" "Carlos Del Rio, on orders from Julian Mercer. They killed her to keep the network hidden." Thomas choked up. 15 years. And now we finally know. She was a hero, Thomas. Your sister died trying to protect the system she believed in. What happens now? Now, Kim said, we go after everyone else, and we make them answer for what they did. The arrest of Julian Mercer sent panic through the federal courthouse. Within hours, phone records showed coordinated calls between other suspected conspirators. "They're trying to get their stories straight," Marshall said. "We need to act now, before more evidence disappears." One of the next targets was Judge Patricia Mendez. She had been identified in Melanie's files as someone who had accepted bribes in exchange for favorable rulings in drug cases dating back to 1984. "She's presiding over a major cartel trial next week," Kim said. "If we don't act fast, she might throw the charges out." "We're drafting warrants for a dozen more arrests," Martinez confirmed. "We'll move tomorrow morning." Meanwhile, Thomas had started receiving threatening phone calls. Unknown numbers, no caller ID. "Thomas," Kim told him firmly, "we need to take this seriously. You're a key witness now. We're arranging protective custody." "I'm not hiding," he replied. "Melanie didn't hide. I won't either." "See no. When they threatened her, they meant it, Thomas," Kim said softly. "Melanie was murdered, and we're not going to let the same thing happen to you." "What about my mom?" Thomas asked, his voice tightening. "Are they going to threaten her too?" Kim had already considered that. "She's being placed into protective custody as well. The people we're dealing with have killed before, and they won't hesitate to do it again." Arranging protection wasn't easy. The sheer scale of the conspiracy complicated every layer of the investigation. With so many law enforcement officers compromised, even choosing who to trust required constant scrutiny. "Agent Marshall," Kim asked during a briefing, "how do we protect witnesses when we can't trust half the badge holders in this state?" "We're using federal marshals only," Marshall replied. "No local departments, no exceptions." The second wave of arrests began at dawn the next morning. Kim personally participated in the arrest of Judge Patricia Mendez, who was caught attempting to shred documents in her chambers when agents stormed in. "Judge Mendez," Kim announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy and corruption." "This is absurd," Mendez snapped. "I'm a sitting federal judge. You can't arrest me without proper authority." "We have a federal warrant," Kim replied, handing it to her, "signed by Chief Judge Dalton himself. You're being charged with accepting bribes to alter outcomes in drug-related cases." Forensic teams examined her computer and uncovered emails coordinating with other members of the corruption network. What they found confirmed that the conspiracy was not only widespread, it was highly organized. "Agent Marshall," Kim said, pointing at one of the screens, "look at these messages. They weren't just sharing money, they were scheduling meetings, drafting joint strategies, assigning cases. This wasn't just bribery. This was a criminal syndicate operating within the judiciary." The emails also included references to contingency plans for silencing whistleblowers. Rebecca Hartwell had not been their only target. "Here," Kim said, highlighting one dated June 1987. "They were discussing a DEA agent asking questions. Said they needed to handle him." Agent Marshall scanned the name. "That was Agent Miguel Rodriguez. He died in a car crash in '87. Too convenient, Kim said. We need to reopen that case. If they killed him, they've killed others. The investigation had officially grown beyond Melanie's murder. The conspiracy had operated for decades, touched hundreds of cases, and left behind more bodies than anyone realized. Carlos del Rioja, man who pulled the trigger, remained at large. He had fled to Mexico days after Mercer's arrest, but the FBI was already coordinating with Mexican federal authorities to locate him. We need him to testify, Marshall said. Ridley's confession is good, but Del Rio was the triggerman. Will they extradite? Kim asked. If we present murder charges and link him directly to Melanie Lane's death, Marshall said, we've got a solid case. They'll cooperate. That same day, Kim received a call from Luis Delgado at the salvage yard. Detective, someone tried to break in again last night, but this time they didn't get in. What happened? I upgraded the security system after the last incident. The cameras caught everything. Kim and Marshall drove out to the yard and reviewed the new footage. The intruder was a woman, mid-40s, dressed professionally. She approached the Buick with purpose, carrying tools far too sophisticated for a petty thief. She's not random, Marshall said. She knows exactly what she's after. Can we identify her? We're running her through facial recognition. If she's part of the network, she's probably already in the system. And, hours later, the result came back. The woman was Assistant U.S. Attorney Linda Harper. She had been working in the Phoenix office since 1983, and she was one of the names on Melanie Lane's original list. She was taking bribes to dismiss cases, Kim said, and now she's trying to destroy evidence. An arrest warrant was issued immediately. That evening, Harper was taken into custody at her home. In her car was a duffel bag containing chemicals, including acid tools designed to eliminate physical evidence quickly. Linda Harper, Kim announced as agents restrained her. You're under arrest for conspiracy and attempted destruction of evidence. I want to make a deal, Harper said quickly. I'll tell you everything, just give me a deal. You'll need to speak with the prosecutors, Marshall replied. In custody, Harper revealed even more about the depth of the operation. They had corrupted the system for over 20 years. Judges, prosecutors, and officers systematically accepting millions in bribes from drug traffickers. There were layers of protection, Harper explained. If a case came too close, we had someone in place. A judge would toss it. A prosecutor would plead it down. A cop would lose a file. How many cases? Kim asked. Hundreds? Possibly thousands. What about Melanie Lane? She was closing in on all of us. She had proof against Mercer and Ridley, but she also knew about the bigger picture. She could have ended it. So, you killed her. I didn't make that call, Harper said, visibly shaken. That was Mercer and Del Rio, but I knew she was a threat. I just didn't know they were going to kill her. Kim didn't buy the denial. The evidence made it clear this network didn't just protect itself, it eliminated threats. Agent Marshall, Kim said, we need to interrogate every suspect about Melanie's murder. Someone gave the order. Someone signed off on her death. We'll push plea deals, Marshall nodded. Make them turn on each other. The investigation had become a web-each confession leading to another, each arrest exposing more rot beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Thomas Lane was growing increasingly uneasy. The truth was finally surfacing, but it had come at a staggering cost. And the fight for justice wasn't over yet. Thomas Lane sat across from Kim, trying to process the magnitude of what they were uncovering. Detective, he said quietly, I knew Melanie was investigating corruption, but I never imagined it ran this deep. Your sister uncovered one of the largest corruption networks in U.S. history, Kim replied. She died trying to protect the justice system. Thomas's voice cracked. How many people did they kill? We're still piecing that together, Kim said, but it's clear Melanie wasn't their only victim. Back at the precinct, pressure was mounting from department leadership. The string of arrests had triggered a wave of negative press, and some high-ranking officials were more concerned with damage control than justice. How much longer is this going to go on? Chief Reynolds asked her during a closed-door meeting. Chief, we're dealing with a conspiracy that spans decades and dozens of individuals. We can't afford to rush it. The media is hurting our image, Reynolds said. The department's reputation is on the line." "With all due respect, sir," Kim replied, "Detective Ridley was one of our own, and he helped cover up a murder. If we don't clean house completely, none of us deserve to wear the badge." "I understand that. But we also need to consider long-term damage to the department." And, as Kim left the meeting, a realization settled heavily over her. Even now, after everything they'd uncovered, image was still being prioritized over truth. The corruption hadn't just infected a few individuals. It had shaped an entire culture. Later, she confided in Agent Marshall, "Even in my own department, I'm not sure who I can trust anymore." "What makes you say that?" "The chief is more worried about headlines than justice. That tells me the rot might go even higher than we thought." "We'll investigate department leadership if necessary," Marshall said, "but right now our focus is the core conspiracy." The investigation was entering its most dangerous phase. The arrests had fractured the network, but also made the remaining conspirators more desperate. Kim knew they would do anything to silence threats, including killing again. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carlos Del Riota, man who had murdered Melanie Lane, contacted the FBI through his attorney. Facing extradition from Mexico, he offered to cooperate in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. "He wants to make a deal," Marshall told Kim. "He's willing to testify about Melanie's murder and about the entire network." "What's he offering?" "Everything. The structure, the orders, the other victims." "Other victims?" "He says Melanie wasn't the only officer they eliminated." The FBI arranged for Del Rio's extradition under tight security. Once in federal custody, he was debriefed and held while negotiations continued. Kim and Marshall conducted the first formal interview. Del Rio was 48, with the hardened face of a man who had spent his life in the criminal underworld. "Mr. Del Rio," Kim began, "we understand you're willing to cooperate." "I am," he said calmly. "I killed Melanie Lane on the 18th of July, 1985. It was a contract job, ordered by Julian Mercer." "Oh, describe what happened." "Mercer told me she had documents and recordings that could destroy the network, said she had to be eliminated immediately." "How did you find her?" "Detective Ridley told us where she'd be, said she was working alone on the highway that night." Kim felt her stomach turn. Ridley had handed Melanie over to her executioners. "What happened when you got to her?" "I used fake credentials. Pulled her over. She thought I was a fellow officer needing help. Then? I made her drive to a remote location. I questioned her, asked what she had, who she told." "What did she say?" "She claimed she'd given copies to someone safe, said killing her wouldn't stop the truth." "Did you believe her?" "Number. We searched her apartment. Found nothing. She was bluffing." "How did you kill her?" "I shot her twice in the head, dumped her body in an old copper mine about 50 miles from where we found her patrol car." Kim had to step out. Even after 15 years, hearing the brutal reality of Melanie's final moments was devastating. When she returned, she asked, "Can you lead us to the body?" "Yes," Del Rio replied. "I can show you exactly where it is." "What about her uniform?" "Mercer told me to keep it, said if anyone in the network ever betrayed him, he'd use it as leverage." "So you left it in the car all these years?" "I forgot about it. The car was stored and I never went back." Del Rio went on to confess to other murders committed by the network. "Agent Miguel Rodriguez," he said. "Killed in '87. He was digging too deep into our operations. Mercer ordered his death." "And others?" "A customs officer. Name was Williams. Killed in '89. Same reason." Kim asked, "How many law enforcement officers have you killed?" "3," he said without flinching. "Melanie Lane, Miguel Rodriguez, Officer Williams, all ordered by Mercer with the network's full knowledge." The confession was damning. This wasn't just corruption. It was murder at the highest levels, a calculated campaign to protect a criminal enterprise. "Agent Marshall," Kim said, "we need to notify the families." "We will. But first we recover Melanie's body." Del Rio agreed to lead a recovery team to the location. A joint team of FBI agents, forensic experts, and local officers prepared for the trip. They arrived in the remote wilderness of the Sonoran Desert, about 50 miles southwest of Bakersfield. Del Rio guided them through rocky terrain until they reached the mouth of an abandoned copper mini sealed since the 1960s. "I left her in there," he said. "She's still down there." Kim took a long breath. 15 years. And finally they were about to bring Melanie Lane home. "I threw her body down the main shaft," Morales said. "It's about 40 feet deep. The forensic team used specialized equipment to search the mine shaft. After 6 hours, they recovered human remains matching the description of Rachel Quinn. "We have a body," the forensic lead reported. "Female, approximately 25 years old, gunshot wounds to the head." David Quinn was waiting at the command post when the remains were discovered. Detective Aisha Kim had to deliver the news. "David, we found Rachel. She's finally coming home." David collapsed in tears. "After 15 years, we can finally lay her to rest." The forensic team carefully processed the remains. A full autopsy would confirm the cause of death. "Will this help with the prosecutions?" David asked. "Absolutely," Aisha replied. "Now we have physical evidence to corroborate Morales' confession." The discovery of Rachel's body became a major news story. Media coverage focused on the corruption network and the murders of federal agents. Public outrage spread across the state. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Judge Julian Mercer finally agreed to cooperate. His attorney contacted the prosecutors to propose a plea deal. "Mercer wants to make a deal," Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellie Martinez told Aisha. "He's ready to provide the full details of the network." "What's he offering?" Aisha asked. "Names, dates, bribe amounts, case details, everything. He's prepared to implicate everyone." "What does he want in return?" "Life in prison, instead of the death penalty." Aisha felt torn. Mercer had ordered Rachel's murder, but his cooperation could bring the entire network down. "Marshal, what do you think of the deal?" she asked. "We need his testimony to convict the others. Without it, some might walk free." "But he killed Rachel." "And he'll spend the rest of his life in prison for it." The plea deal was accepted. Mercer's cooperation would be key to dismantling the rest of the network. In his confession, Mercer revealed the full scale of the corruption. Over 2 decades, the network had taken millions in bribes and manipulated hundreds of cases, protecting drug traffickers, organized crime figures, and corrupt officials. "The network operated like a business," Mercer explained. "We held regular meetings, coordinated strategies, and split profits." "How did you decide what to do with threats?" Martinez asked. "We voted. If someone got too close, we considered our options. Sometimes we could transfer them. Sometimes we discredited them. But sometimes elimination was the only solution." "Who made the final call about Rachel Quinn?" "I did," Mercer admitted, "but everyone agreed she was too dangerous to be left alive." His confession provided the final proof needed to indict the remaining members. 23 individuals were charged with crimes ranging from corruption to murder. As the investigation wrapped up, Aisha Kim felt a complex mix of relief and sorrow. Rachel's murder had been solved, her body recovered, the corruption ring exposed. "Marshal," she said, "this case consumed my life for months, but it was worth it for Rachel." "She'd be proud of what you did," Marshal replied. "She was the real hero. She died trying to protect the justice system." This was the largest corruption case in Arizona history. But more importantly, it had solved the murder of a young officer who was simply trying to do the right thing. The trials of the conspirators began 6 months after the arrests. Led by Martinez, the prosecution team built a strong case based on Rachel's evidence, Morales and Mercer's confessions, and extensive financial records. Former Detective Brian Stone was the first to stand trial. Aisha testified about the evidence they'd uncovered and Stone's own confession. David Quinn took the stand too, sharing how Rachel's murder had devastated their family. "Stone knew my sister was in danger," David told the jury. "He could have protected her, but instead he helped her killers find her." Stone's attorney claimed he was a minor player pressured into cooperating, but the evidence showed he'd been accepting bribes for years and had actively participated in covering up Rachel's murder. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Stone was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice has been served, Aisha told reporters outside the courthouse. Detective Stone betrayed his oath and helped kill a fellow officer. Next was Judge Mendes. Her trial was complicated by her status as a federal judge, but the evidence was clear. She'd taken over $2 million in bribes over 15 years. Your Honor, Martinez told the jury, Judge Mendes sold her oath for money. She corrupted the bench and let dangerous criminals walk free. Her conviction came swiftly. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and permanently disbarred. The final and most dramatic trial was that of the network's enforcers. Carlos Morales testified in graphic detail about the murders he carried out, including Rachel's. I killed 3 federal agents on orders from the network, Morales said. They were eliminated because they threatened the organization's survival. The defense attorneys insisted that Morales fabricated his testimony to escape the death penalty, but the physical evidence, Rebecca's recovered body, and the audio tapes she had hidden solidly backed his account. The jury found all 3 enforcers guilty. They were sentenced to death for murdering federal agents as part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. Julian Mercer's sentencing hearing was the most emotionally charged. Aidan Lane, Rebecca's brother, was allowed to deliver a victim impact statement. Your Honor, he began, voice trembling, Julian Mercer ordered the killing of my sister because she was doing her job. She was 26, just getting started, when this man decided she had to die. Rebecca believed in justice. She believed the system could protect people. But Mercer turned that system into a criminal machine. He proved her wrong. Still, her death wasn't meaningless. Her evidence broke the corruption wide open. She saved lives. She'll be remembered as a hero. Mercer received life in prison without parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, he showed no emotion, no remorse. Over the next year, the remaining members of the network were brought to trial. 21 individuals were sentenced to prison terms, ranging from 10 years to life. Detective Aisha Kim was promoted to sergeant for her work on the case. In her new position, she pushed for reforms in internal affairs and stronger protections for whistleblowers. We have to make sure this never happens again, she told colleagues. When an officer steps forward to expose corruption, we must protect them, not isolate them. The Rebecca Lane case became a landmark in police training. Academies across the country began teaching her story lessons on corruption, whistleblowing, and the cost of silence. Miguel Alvarez, the salvage yard worker who discovered Rebecca's uniform, was honored in a Phoenix ceremony. He received a Civilian Service Award for helping to solve the case. I just found something in a trunk, Alvarez said, but it led to justice. I'm proud I played even a small part. The Arizona Bureau of Investigations introduced the Rebecca Lane Award, recognizing officers who demonstrate extraordinary courage in fighting corruption. It's awarded annually to those who risk everything to do what's right. Aidan Lane returned to his work as a high school teacher, but he also became an outspoken advocate for families of fallen officers. He established a foundation that supports loved ones of law enforcement agents killed in the line of duty, especially those lost to internal corruption. Rebecca's death destroyed our family for 15 years, Aidan said at the foundation's launch. But finding the truth gave us peace. Now we want to help other families get that same closure. The case triggered statewide reforms in how missing officer investigations are handled. New protocols now ensure that multiple agencies are involved, preventing any single department from burying its own secrets. Kim continued her work on cold cases, but none ever came close in scale or impact to Rebecca's. She often visited the cemetery, where Rebecca was finally given a proper burial. I think about her a lot, Kim admitted. She was young, determined, fearless. She died defending justice, and in the end, she won. The old mine shaft where her body was found was sealed permanently and marked with a memorial plaque. It now serves as a somber reminder of the price paid by officers who challenge powerful corruption. Agent Elise Marshall was promoted to head the FBI's anti-corruption unit. Drawing from the Lane case, she helped shape new protocols for investigating law enforcement corruption. The case taught us something vital, Marshall explained. If corruption isn't aggressively rooted out, it can fester for decades. We must stay alert always. She emphasized the need to protect both evidence and witnesses. While Rebecca's materials had survived long enough to bring justice, many other potential witnesses hadn't been as lucky. We learned that secrecy and witness safety are non-negotiable, Marshall said. The network we exposed wasn't just corrupt, it was lethal. And the trials drew massive public interest. News outlets ran features for months. Books were published. A docuseries aired nationally. The story of Rebecca Lane became symbolic a beacon of law enforcement integrity, of sacrifice for truth. Kim frequently spoke at law enforcement conventions, urging departments to support officers who report wrongdoing. Rebecca died trying to do the right thing, she told audiences. We owe it to her memory to make sure officers who stand up for justice are protected, not punished. Arizona's law enforcement culture began to change. Training programs were updated, ethics standards were redefined, internal reporting structures were overhauled. Most importantly, the long-standing silence, the very shield that protected the corruption, was finally shattered. The convictions of Mercer, Stone, Mendes, Harper, Morales, and others didn't just end one case. They opened the door to many more. The investigation. Financial records seized during the arrests revealed connections to other criminal organizations and corrupt officials beyond New Mexico. Agent Marshall coordinated with FBI offices in Texas, Utah, and Colorado to investigate cross-border corruption. The network had been much larger than initially believed. We're finding links to similar corruption rings in at least 4 other states, Marshall told Kim. The Quinn case may have exposed a national infrastructure. How far does it go? Kim asked. We've identified identical bribery patterns tied to cartel-backed enterprises. The same groups that bought influence in Santa Rosa were doing it elsewhere, too. Detective Aisha Kim was reassigned to assist the multi-state investigation. Her experience with the original Santa Rosa network made her a key player in uncovering broader connections. What they uncovered was staggering. The corruption had functioned like a franchise regional crime groups offering bribes to local officials while being managed by larger organized entities that ensured cooperation. It's a business model, Kim said. They locate vulnerable officials in each jurisdiction and embed themselves like parasites. The terrifying part is how long they went undetected, Marshall added. If Rachel Quinn hadn't been murdered, this entire network might still be operating under our noses. And 4. The expanded operation led to arrests in Utah, Colorado, and parts of southern Texas. 47 additional individuals were indicted on federal corruption charges linked to the original Santa Rosa case. Ethan Quinn, now a witness in the broader proceedings, played an increasingly important role. His knowledge of Rachel's private investigation proved essential in helping prosecutors understand the reach of the conspiracy. Ethan, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Martinez, your sister's notes are revealing links we're only now beginning to comprehend. She had a systemic view of the problem that went beyond Santa Rosa. Her instincts were right. She always believed that corruption was never isolated, Ethan replied. She knew it moved like a shadow, always shifting, always expanding. The financial probe revealed massive laundering operations. Bribe money and criminal profits were funneled through restaurants, construction firms, and used car dealerships. We've seized over $50 million in assets so far, said the lead forensic accountant. It's a goldmine of criminal proceeds. What happens to it all? Kim asked. Some of it goes to the Treasury, but we're earmarking a portion to compensate victims of the crimes these networks enabled. Ethan Quinn was awarded a small portion as compensation for Rachel's death. Without hesitation, he donated the funds to the Rachel Quinn Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of murdered law enforcement personnel. But the case wasn't just about money. It was about consequences. Hundreds of violent offenders had slipped through the cracks because of corrupt officials, and many had reoffended. We're reviewing all cases influenced by the network, Martinez confirmed. Some convictions will need to be vacated, but others will be reinstated, this time with legitimate evidence. How do you fix what's already been broken? Kim asked. It's difficult, Martinez admitted. We're partnering with advocacy groups to create a compensation framework for the victims of these failures. Detective Kim was invited to testify before Congress. The Judiciary Committee had launched a probe into systemic failures within federal and local law enforcement oversight. Lieutenant Kim, the committee chair began, what lessons can we draw from what happened in Santa Rosa? The biggest lesson is simple, Kim answered. Corruption hides in plain sight when no one's watching. These people operated for over 2 decades with impunity. What reforms would you suggest? We need federally mandated whistleblower systems, independent oversight bodies, and regular audits of case outcomes. But most of all, we need to change the culture. What do you mean by culture? The silence, the fear. Officers are often punished for speaking out. We need to celebrate those who come forward, not isolate them. Congress responded. The Rachel Quinn Act passed with bipartisan support, establishing new protections for whistleblowers in law enforcement and providing monetary rewards for credible reporting of internal corruption. Ethan Quinn spoke at the signing. Rachel gave her life for this. Her courage wasn't in vain. Her story is reshaping the system. While legislation made headlines, cultural transformation remained slow. That's why her story must keep being told, Kim said. People need to understand the human cost of complicity. International ripple effects followed. The failure of Mexican authorities to extradite Carlos Reyes, the man who murdered Rachel, prompted internal reforms. Extradition delays were reduced, and cross-border intelligence sharing was strengthened. This case became a benchmark in interagency cooperation, Marshall explained. It proved that corruption isn't locale, it's networked, and investigations must cross borders. Are there links beyond North America? Kim asked. We're following money trails leading to Panama and Colombia. It appears cartel influence funded part of the infrastructure in Arizona and New Mexico. Kim was promoted again, now commander of the newly formed Santa Rosa Anti-Corruption Task Force. Her first initiative: implement protocols inspired by the Rachel Quinn case. We investigate every complaint, she instructed her unit. Nothing is too small. Every overlooked tip is a potential tragedy. What if a complaint implicates high-ranking officials? Then we investigate them harder. The culture of secrecy that had once protected the network was collapsing. Officers felt more empowered to report concerns. Citizen trust in law enforcement was beginning to rebound. Training academies nationwide adopted the Rachel Quinn case as mandatory curriculum. Ethics seminars, scenario-based training, and case study breakdowns were now standard in law enforcement programs. Miguel Ortega, the salvage yard owner who first reported the uniform in Rachel's abandoned car, received the Medal of Civilian Valor. I didn't think it mattered, he said at the ceremony. I just made a phone call, but that call changed everything. The mine shaft where Rachel's body was found had been sealed and memorialized. A stone plaque bore her name, flanked by a badge etched in granite. I visit it every year, Ethan said. I sit by the shaft and remember who she was, not just what she died for, but how she lived. She believed in doing what's right, even when no one's watching. As for Kim, she continued working tirelessly, now supervising cases throughout the Four Corners region, but nothing would ever compare to the Quinn case. She changed everything, Kim often told recruits, because she dared to tell the truth even when it cost her everything. Especially complaints against supervisors, Captain Aisha Kim emphasized. Corruption often starts at the top. Under her leadership, the Phoenix Anti-Corruption Unit investigated over 200 complaints in its first year. These inquiries resulted in 12 criminal charges and 37 internal disciplinary actions. The message was unmistakably clear. Corruption would no longer be tolerated. The unit's success rippled across the country. Inspired by the Phoenix model, similar programs emerged in departments from Los Angeles to Boston. The FBI, under the direction of Assistant Director Rachel Marshall, provided training, funding, and structural templates for cities seeking to replicate the results. The Hartwell case changed everything, Marshall noted. Departments across the country are adopting our methods, but the most important element is simple protecting the people who report corruption. If officers don't feel safe stepping forward, the entire system collapses. In the academic world, the Hartwell investigation became a landmark case study. Criminologists, policy analysts, and law students dissected the investigation methods, studied the behavior of the network, and debated the broader implications. Professor James Williams of Arizona State University summarized the findings. The Hartwell case illustrates how corruption is rarely isolated, he explained. It's often systemic, woven into the institution. The key to dismantling it lies in recognizing patterns, not just individual actions. What about prevention? We need to make corruption difficult and risky, Williams continued. That means implementing routine audits, rotating assignments to prevent cozy relationships, and ensuring oversight at every level. Captain Kim was frequently invited to lecture on the topic. At Arizona State, where Rebecca Hartwell had once attended community seminars, Kim often returned to speak with students. Rebecca Hartwell died because she believed in justice, she said to one classroom of criminal justice majors. She didn't look the other way. Every single person in this field has a responsibility to uphold that legacy. 5 years after the final convictions, the Hartwell case still influenced national policing. The FBI formally established a permanent task force to investigate systemic corruption in law enforcement. Marshall, now leading the Bureau's Criminal Investigative Division, spearheaded the expansion. Using techniques developed during the Hartwell case, advanced financial forensics, pattern analysis, and deep cover informants, the task force had opened over 50 major corruption investigations. Hundreds of arrests followed, alongside wide-reaching policy reform. Addressing a national conference of police chiefs, Marshall summarized what they'd learned. Corruption networks are structured like criminal syndicates, she said. They have hierarchies, territories, internal Rule 7 loyalty codes. To dismantle them, we start with the money. Corrupt officials leave financial footprints. And where there's unusual contact between officers and known criminals, we dig deeper. Meanwhile, Captain Kim had become one of the most respected voices in the fight against law enforcement corruption. She was called on to consult across the country: New York, Chicago, Atlanta advising departments on prevention and accountability. The Hartwell case taught us corruption isn't about bad apples, Kim explained at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's about systems that allow rot to spread. That means we need systemic solutions. Such as mandatory audits of prosecutorial outcomes, assignment rotations every 3 years, clear protected channels for whistleblowers, and, most importantly, leadership that makes it crystal clear officers who expose wrongdoing are not traitors, they're heroes. Back in Phoenix, the Rebecca Hartwell Foundation had blossomed under David Hartwell's full-time stewardship. He'd left teaching to run the nonprofit, which now provided comprehensive services to over 300 families of slain officers, counseling, legal support, and financial assistance. What do families need most? A reporter asked him at a press conference. Understanding, David replied. The justice system is overwhelming. Many families don't even know what their rights are after a tragedy. We help them navigate all of it. The Foundation's influence had grown to affect state and federal policy. Their advocacy helped expand survivor benefits and overhaul procedures in missing officer investigations. They'd also launched a scholarship program for children of murdered law enforcement personnel. Rebecca's own nephew, David's son, was one of the first recipients. She would be so proud, David said at the award ceremony. Rebecca always believed in giving people a chance. The Hartwell case also impacted international law enforcement. Following criticism over delays in extraditing Carlos Morales, the Organization of American States established protocols for cross-border corruption investigations based on lessons learned. The Hartwell case demonstrated that corruption doesn't stop at borders, said Ambassador Luis Rodriguez, representing OAS. Our response must be equally global. What specific changes were made? We now have information, sharing treaties, joint task force operations, and synchronized enforcement timelines, Rodriguez explained. It's already producing results. In academia, the study of the Hartwell case continued to spark debate and reform. It was hailed as a watershed momenta case that redefined how institutional corruption was understood and confronted. Captain Kim, now often quoted in law journals and invited to speak internationally, remained committed to the lessons that first emerged during Rebecca's case. "Corruption isn't just about money or power," she told a group of FBI recruits. "It's about lives. Real people die when justice is twisted." Rebecca Hartwell was 26 years old. She believed the system could be better. It's our job to make sure she wasn't wrong. The mine shaft where Rebecca's body was found had been sealed and turned into a memorial site. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, officers from across the state visited to lay flowers and reflect on her sacrifice. And inside the Phoenix Police Department, a new plaque was installed outside the anti-corruption unit. It read, "This office is dedicated to the memory of Officer Rebecca Hartwell, who gave her life so that others might live in justice." Well, as long as that plaque remained, and as long as investigators like Kim and Marshall carried the torch, Rebecca's story would continue to protect the future one case, one whistleblower, one reform at a time. The way we understand corruption has fundamentally shifted, as Professor Williams explained. Previously, it was seen primarily as the misconduct of isolated individuals acting alone. But now, following the Hartwell case, we recognize it more accurately as a deeply rooted form of organizational behavior. This redefinition has significant implications, particularly when it comes to training and education within law enforcement agencies. What does this mean for training programs? Officers must be taught not only how to identify personal wrongdoing, but also how to detect systemic corruption. The indicators are different, and the responses must be appropriately tailored. Simply targeting individual bad actors is not enough. Entire systems and patterns must be examined. For example, unusual case dismissals or consistent plea deals involving major offenders could indicate something far more pervasive. The case had also made a noticeable impact on popular culture. A nationally broadcast television series based on the Hartwell investigation received several prestigious awards. It sparked meaningful conversations and brought widespread attention to the issue of law enforcement corruption. Detective Chen remarked that the show had been instrumental in helping the general public understand how corruption networks operate behind the scenes, often hidden in plain sight. Has the media spotlight been beneficial? Overall, yes. The visibility has created sustained public pressure for reform, and that pressure has made it far more difficult for corrupt officials to carry on their operations without scrutiny. With journalists and civilians watching more closely, the environment that once enabled secrecy has now become a stage of accountability. Miguel Santos, the junkyard worker who discovered Rebecca's uniform, had transformed from an accidental whistleblower into a public advocate. He now served proudly on Phoenix's Civilian Review Board, where he pushed for more transparency in policing. At a local town hall meeting, Santos emphasized that citizens share a responsibility in supporting ethical law enforcement. "When we see something wrong, we have to speak up," he said. "We can't let fear of retaliation silence us." But what about those who are afraid? That, Santos insisted, is precisely why there must be strong legal protections for whistleblowers. The entire justice system relies on people feeling secure enough to report misconduct, even if the offenders are in powerful positions. The mine shaft where Rebecca Hartwell's body had been discovered was converted into a memorial park. Officially named the Rebecca Hartwell Memorial Park, it featured a visitor center that included detailed exhibits on corruption, whistleblowing, and criminal justice reform. During the dedication ceremony, Chen spoke to the gathered crowd. "This place is a reminder," she said, "a solemn marker of what corruption can cost. Rebecca died in pursuit of justice. It's our job now to carry that pursuit forward." The park soon became a pilgrimage destination for law enforcement officers, students of criminal justice, and families affected by corruption and violence. It stood as a tangible symbol of change and of the enduring need for vigilance. The ripple effects extended beyond Arizona and even past national borders. The FBI, Delaware, and other major federal agencies began implementing new, more rigorous background checks. These included financial audits, relationship screenings, and deeper dives into prior law enforcement affiliations. One of the hard lessons from the Hartwell case, explained FBI Director Thompson, is that corrupt officers often have warning signs. We have to be proactive. End of quote. What about those already in the system? Thompson noted that sensitive positions were now subject to regular polygraph examinations and periodic financial disclosures. Prevention, he said, is far more effective than retrospective investigation. Legal reforms were also accelerated. The Rebecca Hartwell Act, which had initially provided protections for federal whistleblowers, was expanded to include local and state officers. Senator Martinez, who sponsored the legislation, shared that the law had already made an observable difference. Reports of corruption have surged, he noted. And more importantly, retaliators are being prosecuted. This law has teat hand, we're using them. Globally, law enforcement training was also evolving. The FBI's International Training Academy developed specialized courses based on the Hartwell case. Academy Director Johnson explained, "We now train officers from around the world on how to recognize organized corruption and how to investigate it securely and ethically. These methods aren't just American, they're universal." And how was the international reception? Extremely positive, said Johnson. Nations see corruption as a global cancer, and they're eager to adopt effective solutions. 10 years after Rebecca Hartwell's murder had been solved, Detective Chen reflected on the transformative nature of the case. It had reshaped her life, restructured her department, and catalyzed national reform. Her death was a tragedy, Chen said. But the change that followed means her sacrifice truly mattered. What challenges remained? Corruption is adaptable, resilient. Networks can morph, find new weaknesses, and exploit new gaps. We have to keep learning, Chen warned. Complacency is the enemy. The future, then, lies in continued education. Future officers need to hear Rebecca's story not as a history lesson but as a living guide. Her courage and the evidence she left behind had become a cornerstone of criminal justice ethics. The Hartwell case is now a primary case study in police academies, law schools, and universities. Professor Davis, speaking to her criminal justice class, summarized it best. Rebecca Hartwell's courage changed everything. She stood up to a system most people feared. And because she did, thousands are safer today. That's what justice demands: sacrifice, resilience, and above all, truth. Today, 15 years after her death, her story continues to resonate not as a closed chapter, but as a call to action. The legacy of the Hartwell case also extended into art, literature, and public education. Several books were published, dissecting the investigation and its broader implications on democracy and transparency. Museums incorporated the case into civic exhibits, and high school curriculums began using excerpts from court transcripts and testimonies to teach students about justice, accountability, and the cost of silence. Across every medium, Rebecca's story reminded citizens and officials alike that no institution is immune to corruption and that courage, even in the face of great danger, can spark lasting change. The ongoing fight against corruption and the importance of protecting ethical officers remained central to the mission. Rebecca Hartwell's investigation didn't end with her death. Chief Chen told the audience of over 2,000 law enforcement professionals. Her evidence continued to work exposing corruption and protecting innocent people. The network Rebecca uncovered had operated for more than 2 decades, corrupting hundreds of cases and costing countless lives. Yet, it was her courage and dedication that ultimately brought the criminals to justice. Today, we have stronger protections for whistleblowers, better systems for investigating corruption, and a culture that celebrates officers who do the right thing. These changes are Rebecca's legacy. David Hartwell, now in his 50s, had dedicated his life to continuing his sister's work. The Rebecca Hartwell Foundation had grown into a national organization with offices in 12 states. Rebecca's death changed everything for our family, David said during his remarks at the conference. But it also changed everything for law enforcement. Her sacrifice led to reforms that have protected thousands of officers. The foundation had assisted over 1,500 families affected by law enforcement, corruption, and violence. We've provided counseling, legal support, and financial assistance to help families rebuild their lives, David continued. But our most important work is education. We must ensure that every new officer understands the importance of ethics and the dangers of corruption. Agent Marshall, now retired from the FBI, had written a book about the case titled The Hartwell Investigation: How One Officer's Courage Exposed a Conspiracy. The book had become required reading in police academies and criminal justice programs across the country. Writing the book was emotionally difficult, Marshall told the audience, but it was essential to document both our investigation methods and the systemic issues we uncovered. The book had been translated into 12 languages and was used by law enforcement agencies worldwide. Rebecca's story has become a global symbol of law enforcement integrity, Marshall said. The most important lesson is that corruption is a systemic issue requiring systemic solutions. Individual prosecutions aren't enough. We need to change the culture and structures that allow corruption to thrive. The conference featured presentations on cutting-edge anti-corruption technologies. Artificial intelligence was being used to analyze case patterns and detect anomalies that suggested corruption. Advanced financial monitoring systems could identify unusual transactions that hinted at bribery or fraud. Technology is giving us new tools, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a researcher at MIT. But it's not enough. We still need brave officers like Rebecca who are willing to stand up for what's right. Some attendees raised concerns about privacy. We need to strike a balance, Dr. Kim acknowledged. But the cost of unchecked corruption is so high that we must use every tool available responsibly and transparently. The conference also welcomed families of officers murdered for fighting corruption. Rebecca's case had inspired others to come forward. "My husband was killed while investigating drug corruption in his department," said Maria Santos, whose husband was murdered in California. The Rebecca Hartwell Foundation helped us find justice and push for reforms. How did they help? A moderator asked. They provided legal support, guided us through the investigation, and connected us with other families, Maria replied. The department has since introduced new protections for officers who report wrongdoing. My husband's death sparked real change. A memorial service honored law enforcement officers who died standing up against corruption. Rebecca's name was read first, followed by 67 others. These officers died protecting the integrity of our justice system, Chen said solemnly. Their sacrifice is a reminder. Corruption isn't just about money or power, it's about life and death. Miguel Santos, now retired from his salvage yard, attended the event as a special guest. His discovery of Rebecca's uniform in a crushed vehicle had jump-started the investigation. "I was just doing my job," Santos said, "but what I found helped bring justice to a murdered officer and triggered reforms that are protecting others today." "How has this experience changed your life?" someone asked him. "It showed me that ordinary people can make a difference. If you see something wrong, say something." What's your advice to civilians? Support honest officers. Speak up when you see corruption. The system only works if we're all part of it. The event closed with the presentation of the annual Rebecca Hartwell Award for Courage in Fighting Corruption. The award had been given to officers from around the world who exposed corruption despite personal risk. This year's recipient was Detective Rosa Martinez from El Paso, Texas. She had uncovered a drug trafficking ring within her own department and faced severe retaliation for it. Detective Martinez represents the very best of our profession, Chen said as she presented the award. She chose to do what was right, even when it was especially difficult. In the face of fear, she demonstrated unwavering resolve, and her bravery set a precedent for officers everywhere. Her actions disrupted a powerful network and initiated a wave of investigations that are still ongoing today. As the applause filled the auditorium, the sense of solidarity among those present was palpable. Officers, advocates, scholars, and survivors of law enforcement corruption cases stood together not only to honor the past, but to shape the future. The ceremony closed with a video tribute showing images of Rebecca's career, her handwritten notes, and news clippings about the case. Emotional music played softly as the audience reflected on what had been Low Stand, what had been built in its place. Rebecca's legacy lives on, not only in policy and reform, but in the lives of those who carry her story forward. New recruits at academies across the nation now swear their oaths with her name etched in their minds, a symbol of what integrity truly means when worn with a badge. Her legacy continues to inspire. It was dangerous. What motivated you to continue your investigation despite the threats? A reporter asked Detective Rosa Martinez. I thought about Rachel Quinn, she answered quietly. She died fighting corruption, but her evidence led to justice. I couldn't let the corruption in my department continue. What changes have resulted from your investigation? 12 officers have been arrested, and the department has implemented new anti-corruption procedures. It's been difficult, but it was necessary. The impact of the Rachel Quinn case extended far beyond local law enforcement. It had reshaped corporate governance, inspired reforms in government ethics, and spurred new academic research on institutional corruption. The Quinn case is studied in business schools as an example of how corruption networks operate, explained Professor Harold Johnson from Stanford Graduate School of Business. The same patterns show up in corporate corruption insiders sharing profits, sabotaging oversight, and eliminating threats. How do we prevent it? Strong oversight, protection for whistleblowers, and a culture that values ethics over short-term gain. Internationally, the United Nations had adopted protocols based on the Quinn case for investigating transnational corruption. The case demonstrated that corruption networks often transcend borders, said Ambassador Elaine Chen, the U.S. representative to the UN. We need international cooperation to fight them effectively. What specific measures have been adopted? Information, sharing agreements, coordinated joint investigations, and synchronized enforcement actions. We've already had success in several multinational cases. Back home, the Rachel Quinn Memorial Park had become a national monument. Congress designated it a historic site, recognizing its role in the battle against systemic corruption. The park receives over 50,000 visitors a year, said Ranger Monica Williams. People come from around the world to hear Rachel's story. What do visitors find most compelling? The exhibit that shows how organized and methodical corruption networks can be. It shocks people. And the memorial? It's deeply moving. People understand that Rachel died for justice, and they leave inspired by her courage. Rachel's case had also influenced media and entertainment. Beyond the Emmy-winning docuseries, there were several films, books, and theatrical productions inspired by her story. Rachel had become a symbol of law enforcement integrity. The media attention has been mostly positive, said Chief Olivia Chen. It's helped educate the public about corruption and why protecting honest officers matters. Any backlash? Some cynicism, sure, but the bigger message is that the system worked. The corruption was uncovered and prosecuted. Technological advances had been driven by lessons from the case. Predictive analytics and digital forensics now played a major role in investigating corruption. We use AI to detect patterns in prosecutions and case management, said Dr. Sung Kim of MIT's Criminal Systems Lab. It spots outliers and anomalies human eyes might miss. How effective is it? We've identified more than 200 potential corruption cases this way. It doesn't replace investigators, but it gives them sharper tools. Internationally, more than 50 countries had implemented the Rachel Quinn protocols. The International Criminal Justice Institute labeled the framework revolutionary. These protocols provide a structure for detecting, documenting, and prosecuting law enforcement corruption, said Professor Linda Davis. They're built on real field experience. The response? Incredibly positive. Convictions are up, and so is transparency. As the International Law Enforcement Reform Conference concluded, Chief Chen took a quiet moment to reflect. It had been 15 years since Rachel Quinn's body was found deep in a sealed mineshaft. The investigation had changed Chen's life. It had changed Phoenix. It had changed how the world approached corruption. Her death was a tragedy, Chen told the closing ceremony audience. But it triggered reforms that have protected thousands. Her sacrifice was not in vain. What still needs to be done? We can't grow complacent. These networks are clever. They'll evolve if we don't stay vigilant. And the next generation? They need to know Rachel's story. They need to understand what's at stake. The Quinn case became central to training curriculums at police academies, law schools, and university criminal justice programs. The Quinn case is a masterclass in systemic corruption, Professor Davis told her students. It's proof that one person's courage can change an entire system. What's the takeaway? That doing the right thing sometimes requires personal risk, but it's always worth it. By the 15th anniversary of her body's recovery, the Rachel Quinn Memorial Conference had become the premier event for law enforcement committed to ethical reform. Attendees included chiefs of police, federal agents, lawmakers, professors, journalists, and families of fallen officers. In her keynote speech, Chief Chen said, "Rachel's investigation didn't end with her death. Her voice, through her recordings, through her notes-kept speaking, her work kept uncovering rot, and today her legacy protects thousands." David Quinn, Rachel's brother, now in his 50s, had devoted his life to expanding the Rachel Quinn Foundation, which operated in 12 states and had assisted more than 1,500 families. "Rachel's death shattered us," David said to the gathered audience. "But it also changed the world. Her legacy saves lives." The foundation offered grief counseling, legal advocacy, emergency financial aid, and above all, education. "We teach ethics. We tell Rachel's story. We prepare the next generation to do better." Retired FBI agent Rebecca Marshall had written the best-selling book, The Quinn Investigation: How One Trooper Exposed a National Conspiracy. It was now required reading in many police training programs. Writing it was hard, Marshall told the audience, but it was necessary. We needed to document what went wrong and how we fixed it. The conference also honored civilians who had made a difference. Miguel Santos, the salvage worker who found Rachel's old patrol uniform in a crushed Buick, was a special guest. "I was just cleaning out a car," he said, "but that one choice helped bring justice." "How did it change you?" "It taught me we all have a role to play. We all have a voice." The final night of the conference ended with the presentation of the Rachel Quinn Award for Courage. This year's recipient was Detective Rosa Martinez of El Paso, who had uncovered a drug protection ring in her precinct at great personal cost. "She's what law enforcement should be," said Chief Chen, "someone who chooses what's right over what's easy." NRA. As the lights dimmed and the audience stood in ovation, Rachel's legacy lived unetched not only into plaques and parks, but into the very conscience of a profession. And in a quiet cemetery beneath an Arizona sky, her headstone read, "Officer Rachel Quinn. She died fighting for justice." Flowers lay at the base. Some were left by fellow officers, others by people she'd never met. All carried the same silent message. "Thank you. We remember. And we will keep fighting."